Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Many of us struggle with sales, whether it's due to a lack in confidence, comfort, or just not wanting to be salesy. This is the traditional reading of the intro. I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm excited to have Jeff Noel on the podcast. Jeff is a friend. He is a mentor. He is someone I trust, and he's been on the podcast a number of different times. This is the second Noel. We did the first one back in December of 2018. Missed last year because I was actually down in Florida. And if you aren't familiar with Jeff, you can hear some of his great stuff on If Disney Ran Your Life, which is the podcast he has. Jody Mayberry is the host of that podcast. Jeff's a keynote speaker. He's a blogger and an all-around great guy. Jeff, it is awesome to have you back on the Catalyst Sale podcast. It has been far too long. I had wanted to do this once a year, and we'll see if we can do this once a year going forward. You joined me on the podcast in December of 2018 for the first Noel, and your last name is Noel. So we thought that'd be a fun way to do it. And then last year, I actually was in Florida for Christmas, and here we are, fast forward another 12 months later, that feels like it's just moved by really, really fast. And we were back for the second Noel, I guess, 2 years later. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. And I can't believe it's been 2 years. I was in Florida last year for Christmas myself, and we'll be in Florida again this year for Christmas.
Do you do anything special in Florida for Christmas? Like, do you go do touristy things outside of the Orlando area, or do you just kind of stay in Orlando? What's your plan around Christmas time when you're in Florida?
A lot of Christmases have been involved traveling home to our home state. Cheryl and I are both from the same state. And obviously we won't be doing that this year. And when we are in Florida, we do not do touristy things. This is when Florida can set single day attendance records, and I don't really want to be in a place that sets an attendance record. So I want to, unless it's the opposite. This is the lowest attendance we've ever had. I'm all in for that.
You had said that to me last year. You had said that to me last year, Jeff. You were like, did you just circle the busiest day of the year and decide that you wanted to be down in Orlando for that? And we did a pretty big family vacation, which kind of ties into what we're talking about today. You had said HQ, and the first thing that comes to mind is headquarters. What's HQ mean to you?
That's exactly what it means. Headquarters, HQ. I'm the CEO of Jeff. You're the CEO of Mike. You're in charge of your life. There's no one that's in charge of your life except you. And if you thought of your home as headquarters, right, you're in charge of the paperwork of your life. You're the business owner of Mike Incorporated. And I'm the business owner of Jeff Incorporated. And everything that comes across my desk for my lifetime is my responsibility. And if we started thinking about our home as HQ and our life as a business, like, how do you manage? Like, you want to run, if you're a business owner, you want to run a really effective and efficient business to get great results for everybody that's involved, including yourself. And I just started thinking years and years ago about running my life like a business. And I've really thought about the structure and process of decision-making and consequences and choices and all of that. And I've just really honed, I'm not perfect by any means, but man, I am light years ahead of the way I used to do things.
Light years ahead of what? Like, what does that mean? So I know you said the way you used to do things, but give some context. Where were you? And then where are you?
What I mean is there's so much that goes into running a business, and you're aware of it because you've got to run the business. There's so much that goes into running a home, but we take it for granted. I think I took it for granted for so long because you just develop habits as you grow up, and you never really think about putting it all together and just some focus on how do you reduce decision fatigue? How do you scale consistency? How do you scale quality? How do you scale effort so that as much as you can put on autopilot is on autopilot without losing anything? In fact, everything that you do is designed to enhance the results that you get and reduce the amount of time, effort, money, and energy that it takes to get those results. You're just streamlining everything. And Disney really focused me on There's always a better way to do whatever it is you do, from the smallest detail to the biggest detail. There's always room for improvement. And yet we don't think of how do we constantly or not, how do we consistently improve over time. That small incremental improvements are almost inconsequential, but over time, Mike, they change the game. And you and I were just talking before we got on this podcast about my desire. I could be at my desk right now, 3 miles away. Could be at my desk with my ATR 2100 microphone, plug them into my laptop. Everything would be predictable and the quality would be at the highest level I could produce. And I decided to walk here and take the risk with my AirPods. And I've got one phone that gets great cell signal, and I'm tethering my other phone, which is the phone that we're on, so I could get Wi-Fi because I didn't want to trust Disney Wi-Fi. Anyway, all of that is just to say that I put a lot of thought into making it look like this is a casual thing.
It is a casual thing. And we've had some really awesome walking conversations, and they take the form of questions. They take the form of pauses for reflection. They take the form of, sometimes they're not structured. Sometimes they're a little bit more structured. When you're talking about this, you're looking at your home as your headquarters and operating your business, what are some things that people can do to hit on a couple of the words that you already brought up? You brought up things like structure and process and reducing decision fatigue. What are some things that we can do at home to help improve that?
I'm going to start with just using what's around me. Number one, when I get on a podcast, it is not a casual thing for me. I'm saying where I'm at and what I'm using seems casual, but I put a lot of thought and effort and energy into this and what I'm bringing. I have a vision that I can record from because I have my own podcast, If Disney Ran Your Life, hosted by Jody Mayberry. And I want to be able to record my own podcast exactly like you and I are doing right now, from anywhere with only what's in my pocket. So I have two phones. One phone is AT&T, and the other phone is last year's version of the iPhone. And I was intentional to tether. You need Wi-Fi to do a Zoom call. And while I'm at Disney World, at Disney University, the Wi-Fi for employees, for cast members, is great. But for a guest, I'm a bit away from the Contemporary Resort and the Magic Kingdom. So the guest Wi-Fi, which is the only Wi-Fi I have access to here, it's just okay. But AT&T is great where I'm at. So I didn't want to chance that. So I was very intentional about bringing two phones so I could tether and I've already tested out my AirPods, knowing that the sound quality would be pretty good for being mobile. And Mike, the other thing I wanted to tell you, on both of my phones, I don't carry a wallet usually. Well, you should carry ID. Well, I have as my screen, when you touch my phone, what comes on is a picture of my driver's license and my Disney retiree ID. So if anybody wants to see ID, or if I fall and I'm unconscious and people get my phone, they'll be able to see who I am, where I live, etc. That is a level of organization about having structure and process in place that are just very simple. But if you explode this out exponentially, ripple this out exponentially into everything that you do, there's almost like nothing that you do that hasn't been put under a microscope and asked, how can I do this better?
There's a high level of intention, as you just described. Intention in design. You've intentionally designed for optimal reception, optimal audio, experience where you can be creative. Is that a challenge that people have? Well, people and organizations. Is that a challenge that people and organizations have? Challenge specifically being intentional? And if so, why?
It's definitely a challenge being intentional. Most people, and I used to be one of those, and most organizations, and I used to work in organizations like that before I started with Disney. And the last 15 years at Disney, when I was with Disney Institute, I got inside somewhere around 2,000 different organizations to varying degrees of depth. And almost without fail, very few organizations have a culture that's by design. Very few people have a life that's by design. When you can be intentional. And so I'm going to close out that last question of what tips would I give? think of the structure that you have in your life and the processes within that structure that get the work done. If you just over focused on the same things that you used to or currently under focus on, or maybe ignore, that would be my biggest tip of all. And then these specific tips about packing 2 phones and the AirPods and the connectivity, and my screensaver's got my ID on it. I've got my AirPod charger in my pocket in case I run down. I actually walked here from home, so I wanted to get a workout in. So this is going to be a 10K round trip walk minimum. So I organized my day so that I could get my exercise, take a break, be in a really magical place, do this podcast with you, and then walk back. And in the walking to and from here, I'm also able to conduct my business or just completely zone out. I have that flexibility baked into my day. But back to Mike, are most organizations intentional? I would say most aren't. They do have strong habits though. Their culture is definitely, that's all culture is habits. Whether it's an organizational culture or personal culture, you and I are driven every day by our habits. And if you over focus on your structure and process in your life, you'll start thinking about your habits in a way, because you're in charge of them. You're in charge of them. And if you really looked at them, you'd say, I wonder how I can make that better. What do I need to stop doing? What could I start doing? Or what could I just tweak a little bit that with a tweak, it could make things so much better?
What are some things that we can do to really kind of get ourselves in the mindset of the home as an organization?
So here's a reach to get in the mindset, because you really have to have a mindset. You don't have to, but if you want to have excellent results, you got to have a mindset. Excellence is not an accident. I mean, there's obviously exceptions to everything, I think, except maybe math. Math is like the perfect science. But ask me the question again.
So, what I'm wondering is, so we just talked about organization and the organizations that we've been a part of, and some of the challenges that we have with identifying, being very clear about an intentional vision. When we start thinking about organization from a home perspective, or looking at the home as an organization, what are some things that we can think about there? Like, do we look at the family unit as an organization? Is it an organization? Is that the right way to think of home? Or is it just a group of people kind of working together, operating inside the same system? How do you think about these things when drawing the correlation between home as an organization versus the traditional workplace as an organization?
So I do believe that home, everybody is involved in it. I do believe that it starts with you as the CEO of your life. So you really you should be getting your own ducks in a row before you start worrying about somebody else's ducks. And hopefully from your example, that your example is the best teacher. To come back to what you were asking me, I believe it revolved around mindset. So here's where I wanted to go with that. It does take a mindset. Excellence isn't a habit, isn't an accident. And here's what you could try on for size to sort of stretch and loosen up and get your mental muscles and spiritual muscles about reaching for what might seem impossible. But if I asked you, who's the most organized person at home that you know? I'm not talking about the most organized at work, the most organized garage, or the most organized basement, or the most organized kitchen drawers. I'm talking about the most organized person at home overall. And you're probably going to think about somebody who's really, really organized. And what I would challenge everyone to reach for is, when you ask that question, who's the most organized person at home that I know, that you identify yourself as that person. What would it take for you to be the most organized person that you know at home? And I think it's important to also distinguish that being organized and being neat are not the same thing. I'm not talking about you walk into somebody's house or apartment or condo or wherever they live, their dorm room, and it's really just everything's in its place. I don't necessarily, that neat and organized they can go together, but they can also be two distinctly different things. You can be neat, but not really organized. Because here's why. Like you have to be organized to make decisions. Your priorities need to be organized. Most people don't know what their priorities are. Most people don't realize that there's a process for decision making, that the goal for decision making is to reduce decision fatigue. Try and come up with a way that you don't have to invent the wheel every time you've got a decision to make. What intentional plan and process do you have? You should have a backup for everything, but do you have a backup for your backup? Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
When you start thinking about being excellent and being organized, having a backup for the backup has nothing to do with being neat. It has to do with the structure and process in place. And where I've gotten mostly what's motivated me is when I do not have a backup and the thing fails and I don't have a backup. So then, it's been a progression, and then I'd have a backup. So my main would fail, my backup would fail, and then I'm out again. And then I started taking it to one more step to have a backup for the backup. Think about your photo storage, for your email, for your iCloud, right? Where is the redundancy for the most important things in your life? The paperwork that you have that is critical, documents, all of that stuff, passwords. What is your structure and process for that kind of organization? I'm not talking about lining your pantry shelves. All the soup is in alphabetical order. I'm not talking about that. Although you can do that if you want. Knock yourself out.
One of the things that comes to mind here, and I know this is an important thing at Disney, and I didn't spend any time working inside the organization, but there's a difference between what happens as the show is going on and what happens behind the show, or in backstage. Is there a lot of stuff going on backstage that nobody really knows about when thinking about the organization from a home perspective?
You have no idea. You have no idea. It's just, I tell people that it's chaos 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at a big organization like Disney. And you know what? It's probably the same in any big organization. And I would say it's probably similar in small organizations because it's all relative. But I'm basically saying that for us to make it look like it's magic, it is insanely organized and structured, and the processes are designed because we want it to be excellent. So how do you get to the least amount of effort to deliver the best possible experience for the employees, for the customers, and for the business?
And it doesn't seem like you can just make this up as you go along.
No, and I think that's really probably one of the biggest dissatisfiers for anybody listening is people go, yeah, Jeff, Mike, but you guys don't understand my work situation or my personal situation. I do understand. We're coming up on, it's December of 2020. We're coming up on Christmas. We're coming up on the end of the year. I picked on my third try. I will have December 31st is going to be the start of my 20th year not drinking. I did not set out to say I'm going to go 20 years without drinking any alcohol. It was one day at a time. So Disney didn't get to where we are being as organized and focused and intentional as we are. It's just over time, the mindset is, I said, who's the most organized person you know at home? You should pick yourself. If Disney said, who's the most organized world-class company, we would want to pick ourselves, right? So we just have this mindset that everything can be improved and that great ideas can come from anywhere. So we even organize our creative process so that anybody can have a great idea, and anybody and everybody should have great ideas. And you've got to create a culture where people feel like their voice matters. And otherwise they won't, I'm not going to say anything. They never do anything with my ideas. You've also got to train yourself to listen to yourself, because often we get in this mindset where we get this idea and they're like, well, I've never been able to pull something like this off before. So what makes me think I'm going to be able to pull it off now? So we stop and we set the bar low, and then we end up just going through the motions. And this is really about having a super high bar on being organized.
What if someone says being organized stifles creativity or stifles production or gets in the way of being productive? What if someone said that to you? How would you respond?
I'd call them an amateur. They don't understand creativity. If you think creativity is blue sky, out of the box thinking, you're being misled. And there's probably some genres or some things where that would apply, but I'm saying overwhelmingly, like probably 98, 99% of the time, You want to think inside the box. This is why creativity really fails in a lot of organizations, is because people can be creative. We're not looking for creative ideas. We're looking for creative solutions to our biggest, most repetitive issues. And we're also trying to solve these biggest, most repetitive issues with either zero money or either low budget or no budget. We want to solve it in the least amount of time, with the least amount of expense, with the least amount of energy, with the least amount of pain and suffering. That's the goal of creativity, is to fix things quickly and permanently and move on to the next big challenge, because the challenges never stop in business and in life.
There's always another obstacle that you're going to come to. So, solve for the one that's in front of you, solve for the one that's there, and continue to keep moving forward. Is that fair?
I would say, just for each person listening, what do you think, man? It's just, it never stops. Does it ever stop at work, at home? And Mike, this notion where I said amateur, I didn't mean it as a dig. Maybe it came across that way. And maybe I did subconsciously mean it as a dig. I'm not really sure. I wanted to get people's attention for sure. My next TED Talk is probably going to be think inside the box. Why thinking outside of the box is a flawed concept. And that piggybacks off of my TED Talk. Sorry to interrupt. I have a TED Talk called Why Going the Extra Mile is a Flawed Concept and What to Do Instead. And we go from the extra mile to the opposite end of the spectrum, to the extra inch. Is all it takes is to exceed expectations. And people are, I've seen it. I've been inside 2,000 different organizations. I spent 30 years of my life at Disney on constantly solving for small, medium, and big challenges, Mike. Challenges that we saw coming and challenges we never saw coming. Small, medium, big challenges. Challenges you see coming, challenges you never see coming. And world-class organizations create a culture where great ideas have no choice but to flourish. And the DNA of this conversation is that each of us individually, you listening, you can create your own personal culture as CEO of you, where you can find structure and process that is going to be better than the current structure and process that you have. And it's going to start to transform your life, because things are going to get easier. You're going to solve for things faster. It's going to take less effort, and the payoff is going to be greater. But again, it's one day at a time. And here's the thing. We got till the day we die. So why not get started slow and steady? You really have to have this belief. You have to have as much as we hate being patient, you can't plant an acorn and expect a giant oak in 10 years. It's not going to happen. But the tree will grow. The tree will grow year over year.
Just reinforces to me the importance of being intentional, being deliberate, taking action, doing these things day by day, controlling the things that you can control, which are you, making that impact inside your family, inside the organization and the home, then making that impact broader and beyond. And there's so many different stories that you've shared in different ways and shapes and form. And Jeff's podcast is If Disney Ran Your Life. There's a familiar voice on there. Jody Mayberry is the host of the show. He publishes content a season at a time. You heard the other day on one of Jody's shows, Jeff, that you are in the process of recording season 7. Go out and listen to the podcast. Think about these questions. Be extremely intentional. Jeff, just as we start to wrap up the conversation, one of the other things you had shared with me, just as we were doing some prep for this, you had mentioned win the morning. What does that mean to you?
I think if you can win the morning, you win the day. Meaning you should be able to get your biggest victories in the morning, because the day is going to unfold, and small, medium, and big challenges are going to hit you. Challenges that you saw on your calendar coming, and challenges that you never saw. They were never on your calendar. And what happens if you can get the win? You got it. But this means you, in my opinion, I get up at 5 o'clock every day. I just get up at 5 o'clock every day. I get more work done in the first 2-3 hours of the day than most people get done in the entire day, because the day hasn't had a chance. The sun is barely up by the time I've put in 2 hours of work. And I thrive on that because of the payoff, what I've learned. And I didn't set out to do it. When I became an instructor at Disney Institute, I went from working, never having a set schedule, and doing a mandatory turnaround every week, meaning you close one day at the Grand Floridian Hotel, and then you open the next day. You had turnaround. So you might operate on 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and you do that for 15 years in a row. Every week you do a turnaround. It's brutal. And you don't even know it happens to you. And then I went to Disney Institute, where as an instructor in a multi-day class, you're the first one in the classroom and the last one to leave. But if breakfast is served at 7, you got to be there at least by 6. So I fell into becoming a morning person and did that for 15 years. And now I can't imagine my life ever being different. Why would I ever sleep in because of of the victories? And Mike, I think winning the morning is actually won the night before. I believe the workday begins the night before. If you know what time you have to get up, like we open up the Magic Kingdom and the other parks and different things. If you know when the opening time is, everything is based on opening time. Well, if you think of your day as the opening time, when does Mike's theme park open? When does Mike's day begin? Mine begins at 5. So I know that, and I know that I have an optimal number of hours of sleep that I operate the best. I can operate on less. I can operate on more. More hardly ever happens. Less happens more than I'd like it to. But in an ideal world, to get 8 hours of sleep, I need to be in bed by 9 o'clock. So just knowing when I start automatically makes my bedtime easy to understand. So I have to be able to end my day in a way that I can get as close to 9 o'clock as I can if I want to get up in the morning fully rested. So I believe you win the day by winning the morning, and I believe you win the morning the night before.
So I'm going to steal, we'll call it borrow because that sounds nicer. I'm going to borrow one of the things you do in your show, and I'm going to put out a 72-hour challenge. And Jeff has already shared some ideas on how you can go about doing this, but I'd like to hear from you. After listening to this, what will you do differently tonight to make sure that you're prepared to win the morning tomorrow? Because as Jeff just talked about, each of these things, they're incremental things that add up. They're one step at a time. You talked about planting an acorn and getting a tree. There's that old saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So take this 72-hour challenge. Let Jeff and I know. You can let us know via Twitter and LinkedIn. Jeff will share his Twitter information here as we wrap up, and I'll make sure that there are links in the show notes. But what will you do tonight after listening to this episode to help prepare yourself to win the morning tomorrow? Jeff, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that for you to list yourself as the most organized person at home that you know might seem impossible. Here's what Mike is asking you to do in this 72-hour challenge. I'll give you an example of something I did. We live in a 2-story house. My office is on the 2nd floor. I have a water bottle that I fill up the night before, and it sits at my desk. I wake up at 5 o'clock. I kiss my wife on the head. I get down on my knees. I say 3 prayers. I've been doing that every day since my son was born because I figure I don't have a minute every day. So I'm organized. And this is an organizational piece that nobody knows. I don't tell people about it, but it's such a simple thing because I say to myself, you don't have a minute. Sometimes I spend longer, and I do it throughout the day as well. But I start the day on my knees, 3 prayers. I say the same way every time. Kiss my wife on the forehead. Then I walk over to my office down the end of the hall on the 2nd floor, fire up my computers, sit down, and I start chugging water. I don't have to go downstairs. I know I could go downstairs, but I don't need to. I did the night before. So I immediately start chugging water. As a runner, I developed this habit because I wanted to hydrate. I would work for 2 hours at my desk, and then I would head out the door and go for several miles, anywhere from 4 to 10 mile run. And the sooner I start hydrating, so if it's simply filling up a bottle of water and putting it strategically in some place where you can start hydrating tomorrow morning, that's a win.
That is an awesome example. Jeff, where would you like people to follow you? What would you like, action would you like people to take to engage with you?
The best way for anybody to say thank you is to become a better person. So one of the things, structure and process, I'm not a fan of numbers. So I spend a lot of time on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can just Google my name, Jeff Noel. When our son was born 20 years ago, in December, when he could comprehend this, like as a 2 or 3 year old, I said, we change our name to Noel in December. The rest of the year, it's Noel. And anyway, just Google Jeff Noel, Noel. And if you want to follow, I'm not here to try. I got a lot of free stuff. out on the internet. If it helps you, great. I'm not looking to sell you something. Now, if you work for a big company and you want a keynote speaker, we can talk, but that's really expensive. But it's worth it. It's totally worth it. It's the best deal of your company will ever get.
Jeff, as always, it is awesome to chat with you. And thanks for being a friend. Thanks for being someone I can count on. Thanks for being someone who helps me get better every day. And it's that question that you ask, who's the most positive person? Who's the most energetic person? Who's the healthiest person? And if you've followed Jeff, you watch what he does on LinkedIn or Twitter or listen to his podcast, you'll know that it comes back to the right answer. The answer you should be able to confidently say is you. And it starts with you. Jeff, thanks for doing this. If you know of someone who would enjoy listening to this podcast, would get any benefit out of listening to this episode, please share it with them. If you have comments for me, please send those to @Simmons_M on Twitter or podcast@catalystsale.com. Thanks for sharing this. Thanks for taking advantage of that 72-hour challenge, putting this work into practice, and thanks for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.